everyone, welcome to our channel where we chat with working professionals who use data to solve business or research problems. We learn about their stories and their advice for students. My name is Sophia Young. I am a senior data scientist at Anaconda. My co-host is Stacia Ryder.
Hi, Stacia here. I am a field scientist, outdoor school instructor for youth on the coast of Oregon.
Thank you, Stacia. We are very delighted to have Marc Kelechava joining us today. He is a data scientist at O'Reilly Media. Marc, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became a data scientist?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me on. So yeah, I'm currently working as a data scientist at O'Reilly Media, which is an e-learning platform, above all else, kind of like a Coursera, Udacity, but more geared toward like textbook type learning. And I'd say I had in some ways a typical background for data science academically, at least in undergrad, but in other ways a very kind of meandering path to become a data scientist. So I've been in the workforce now for maybe 11 or 12 years, something like that, but only the last two have been in the data scientist role and profession. Um, so I think one thing that I do want to dive into as we talk, just and underscore, you could definitely get into this field later on. Like you don't have to have everything decided and mapped out. I definitely talk to people who sort of worry about that they need to be on kind of a certain path to do these things, and I just don't. I don't necessarily ascribe to that mindset. Um, and yeah, but specifically kind of how did I end up in this field? So I studied math, just pure math undergrad, and after that, I was kind of thinking like, all right, what am I going to do? This was maybe 2008. Um, so there wasn't like the field of data science, so to speak, at that time, and there it was just much different in terms of what the opportunities were if you study something like math. I think the most common was actuarial work at that time. Just for people I knew, teaching, of course, was quite common. Um, Further math study, academic wise, and then fourth would be like a lot of government work. I knew a bunch of people who went on to like cryptography and stuff like that. But I started working at a genomics lab, um, outside of Boston, where I went to school, and I didn't have any like biological scientific background, but they were sequencing like viruses and the human genome for the first time at this center, and they needed people to do kind of like somewhat painstaking Linux and Perl work just to figure out like if the machines were doing a good job sequencing it at all. Like before scientists could kind of dig in and figure out, hey, is this like can we actually uh, have a good enough signal from the sequencing to be able to do further research, or did the machines just fail? And so it was very by hand at the time. There wasn't like machine learning being applied. So today, I don't even know that this job would exist. I think it's probably been like automated away uh, by advances in machine learning. But at the time, yeah, I was just doing that. I was learning. Uh, regular expressions, Perl and stuff like that. It was in a somewhat academic setting, and honestly, it was that kind of academic life wasn't for me. It was a little bit slower pace than I kind of wanted to be working at. Um, and around the same time, I knew like a bunch of people that also had studied more analytical things. They were going into the online ad optimization space in one way or another. Like that was really picking up at the time. Google AdWords and specifically was gaining a lot of market share in the ad market. just from TV ads and other kind of digital display and email and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, I mean, I wonder if I could just apply some of these technical skills I learned here plus the math I studied undergrad and do something with that. So um and at the same time, like a bunch of my friends had moved to New York, and I was like, I want to do that. So I didn't, I didn't really have a good sell for this on why I should be a good candidate for these jobs, because the only experience I had was studying like DNA for a year or so, a year or two, and I convinced somebody to give me an unpaid internship in this space, and was just like, no, I like promise you, like I can do this, and if it went well, it would turn into like a real, real position, which it did. Um, so yeah, I think being creative can help if you want to get into a field that you're not necessarily so competitive with at the time, and that opened up a lot for me, that first job, just because I learned the ad industry, like how people run experiments, how things are measured. At that time, I wasn't doing really much coding in the online ad world. It was more Excel based, to be honest. Um, and I don't, I mean, Python certainly didn't have the ease of use and accessibility that it does now. Um, but yeah, I was doing that, and I eventually did the same type of work, just ad optimization, kind of campaign management, um, optimizing bidding, running testing. I did all that for this group at American Express as well. So that was like my first kind of like bigger job where I'm working for this large corporation doing this stuff that I really just learned on the fly, and suddenly had to do it like in a much more serious capacity, with what seemed like very scary, sort of serious people everywhere. Uh, but yeah, that I think I learned how to navigate a large organization. And honestly, like of everywhere I worked, probably working at a company that large has been the most impactful long term, because you really like learn how to work within a corporation. And I think even though like those type of skills are useful, I think in any job role, and it served me well after at smaller companies, similar sized companies. Um,
So
so
what does it mean to the skills working in a large corporation? Because I have not had that experience, so it's hard for me to understand what that actually means.
yeah, it's the way I think of it is you have to sort of sell your work a bit more.
Mm.
So it's like, yeah, you have to do the work, but ultimately, like if you're not pitching it in a good way, um, it kind of gets just lost in the shuffle because so many people are working on similar things. And it's very matrix, right? Like you'll have a group that maybe let's say focuses on one area of americanexpress.com, like running optimized offers on this page for card members, and you're like, oh, how big could that group be? And it'll be like 25 people or something. So you're kind of like not like in a bad way, but you're sort of competing with all these people doing similar types of work, and there's a lot of them. um, and I think that, yeah, you have to really learn how to get people interested in the stuff that you've done and like concisely explain it, um, so that it's interesting to a wide group of people. I think or at least I feel that it's helped me a lot in data work, because a lot
Mm.
of times like data science work, you're not presenting, it depends on where you work, but you're not necessarily going to be presenting your work to like very very technical audiences. It's all types of people at different parts of the organization. um, so yeah, I'm definitely like kind of grateful for that initial experience, because I think it's helped me in that regard.
So it sounds like you have to advocate for yourself. The work doesn't speak for itself. You have to constantly
Yes.
remind people that my work is important, and
We've heard
I'm
that
making an
before
impact.
from people. Yeah, that's a common
Yeah.
theme that's shown up. I wanted to go back, and if you were comfortable talking about that a little bit more, you mentioned that you basically like talked your way into being given a unpaid internship. And so I just think of like a lot of youth today, you know, aren't maybe that privileged, or maybe you weren't either. You know, like, did you have to work a second job at that time? You know, like, how did you make ends meet? You know, like,
Yeah.
what's the give? How did you make that work?
So I had money saved from like my first job, and it had, an expiry date of n months. It was going to run out
Uh-huh.
after like
Uh-huh.
6 or 8 months. So it kind of like, if I was gonna, it had to work. Like I had to
Gotcha.
make it work. And
Wow.
thankfully, like it wasn't unpaid for that long. Like when I first talked to them, they were like, "All right, this will be unpaid for like a month, and then we'll figure out some type of pay rate."
Yeah,
Um,
that makes sense. Thanks for
but
sharing.
but no, it's, I mean, that's a fantastic point. Like had I not done that initial job that really wasn't that great a fit, if the one thing it did offer was a bit of a cushion, um,
Mm-hmm.
to build on.
And it's very
Yeah.
brave of you to quit a job and then move to New York, start fresh without a job landed. It's very difficult to get your feet started in New York.
I think, and this is probably a theme that'll come up again, is that maybe sometimes I take too big risks without fully thinking of what could go wrong, and then just like really stubbornly try to make it work. Um, but
But it
yeah,
does work.
I think I've had a lot of luck in some of these endeavors as well. So so I was at, yeah, I was working at Amex for a couple years, still doing sort of ad optimization, ad targeting, and I I hadn't I was hitting a point where I felt like to advance at specifically this large corporation, like they valued MBAs above all else. Like that was just a thing, and it was 100% true. It wasn't like just the window I had in. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. And first of all, it's too expensive, and second of all, I don't really have interest in that kind of path. So I started looking around for similar types of jobs in New York, and somewhat haphazardly realized that Facebook had an office in New York. I had no idea. I just assumed there was just like in a massive building in California, which I had never been to. Um, and I applied on, I don't know, Indeed or Monster.com or something like that. It wasn't the only place I applied. I was kind of in this point in my life where I was just spamming out resumes. I didn't necessarily have like a huge professional network at this point because some of my career decisions were somewhat haphazard. Um, but yeah, the Facebook recruiters got back to me, and I think initially they honestly were a bit confused by my resume and thought maybe I was going more for a sales position, and then figured out later that I'd been just doing this ad optimization work, and they were like, oh, like we have that now, like we're trying to run ads, and like we have people that get embedded with really big advertisers and kind of help them run their ads and all that stuff. And I was like, cool, that's exactly what I've been doing for 3-4 years now. um, and went through the process there. This is like 2012. um, and yeah, it worked out, and that was just like this unbelievable intense experience for a couple years where I don't think I really understood what I was getting into. Like I didn't know much about the tech industry or startups or anything. um, and all of a sudden it was like I'm going from working 40 hours a week to like 70 hours a week, and just having way higher kind of expectations about like the depth of data analysis, the tooling, the quality of like visualizations and all that stuff. And I, I look back on it, and I'm surprised they had even hired me, because so much of it was like having to be really good at SQL to do a lot of the day-to-day work. Running ads, doing tests for these big advertisers, and I hadn't done that. So I had to really like learn SQL on the fly. And thankfully, that I was at a place where like they had very, very, very good data engineering, and it's something I do want to touch on a bit later. Like I think if you're going to go into the data science profession, or just data field at all, I think you'll have a much better time if you go somewhere where there is like there's a core team somewhere in the company dedicated toward ingesting and transforming data in an organized way for the rest of the company. And it is not true in all situations. It was true at Facebook, and it made doing a lot of this analysis much, much easier. And yeah, that was the whole ride there was just kind of wild. I was there for about 6 years. At first I had about 4 jobs there. I think at first I did the same type of like running ads for large corporations. Then I got into this more like data analyst role there, where we were creating kind of new ad targets to test out, but ones that were like very privacy safe. And just see, like, so an example is, okay, like what if we restricted how many ads people can see by the total frequency that they've seen that ad for one advertiser in some period of time. Stuff like that, like trying to run some tests around the ad load and other things. I was doing that, and then I got much more into the performance marketing side, which is kind of like you care a lot about the incremental cost of the ads you're running, and not just like what does this cost per click or what does this cost per conversion, but what's this gonna cost you in terms of your total business return, like 2-3 months down the line. How did that ad spend impact that? And if you hadn't run ads at all on Facebook, how what would that look like? So a lot of like kind of lift testing or hypothesis testing, A/B testing, more like stats driven stuff. And that's when I started to really like get a sense that data science was happening and something that I probably wanted to get much deeper into. I was just like dipping my toes in, really. Like I was, if anything, a client representative for really large advertisers and helping some of their teams do this type of testing in a statistically like sound manner. But I still wasn't programming. I hadn't written like a line of code at this point. Like at that point, let's say I was like 30, 31 years old, beyond SQL. And some of the Perl I had done in my first job. But I was kind of seeing this ecosystem rise up around me and being like, damn, I kind of wish I had done that. And then I was like, well, I could at this point probably just do that now. If I took some time off and really tried to just like get better at on the programming side of things, and learn more foundations of the field, and like how does machine learning even work? Like what does that even mean? I knew what it meant in terms of like how Facebook was applying it to targeting, or how some of these big advertisers were applying machine learning to their business processes or ad optimization. But like I'd never done that. And yeah, so at that point, I left because I'd been there for a while, and I was able to, take a good amount of time and figure out like how do I make this transition. And I had seen that these boot camps had popped up. I knew people had done them on the software engineering side, but I saw that um, they were happening on the data science side as well. And that's what I decided to do. I went to this one in San Francisco called Metis, um, which is really cool, kind of like 3 month uh, immersive experience. And they yeah, it was really transformative. I went from really not being able to code anything beyond like tutorial level to kind of like 3 months later making somewhat well functioning models, and being able to code well enough to go on data science interviews. um, Plus like I'd done 6 years of SQL or whatever, and had these sort of analytical experiences over time where it all kind of came together, and I was able to get this data scientist job in a pretty competitive market at the time. um, I was definitely the one like risk factor with all this that I think could have definitely not like blown up in my face a bit more, was just the fact that in the field itself, like if you don't have a grad degree, you're in the pretty severe minority in the data science world. I don't think I think you can absolutely break into it without it, but if you look at like major surveys and like data science occupation statistics in the U.S., like the recent ones, I think data scientists with a bachelor is like less than 10%, maybe something like that. Um, and it's really like the master's degree has kind of taken off as the de facto standard. I think I got kind of lucky that that wasn't something that at least O'Reilly was very concerned about. They're more like, can you do this work? Do you have this knowledge? How are your problem solving skills? Stuff like that. I think what's nice about both software engineering and maybe to a bit of a lesser to extent data science is that the interviews itself, um, it ends up being very kind of like, what is your technical skills on these tasks, really above all else. I think a lot of the time, and good companies, like they have processes in place where they are heavily weighting your performance on these things. So if you practice on those things, then I think you can break in even without like the right credentials, so to speak.
So, if you had to describe yourself during that time of your life when you were in, I don't know, middle school or high school, whichever one resonates with you the most, can you describe yourself in 3 words?
Yeah, so this is another one where I was just like kind of all over the place when I was younger. Like I'd say like number one, literary for sure. Like that's all I cared about was reading like, like big classic novels and stuff like that. Uh I had a deep like musical focus, and like in terms of where I was spending my time, it was enormously in that end. Like I started playing violin when I was like 4, and I traveled around doing it for like a good amount of time when I was before 11 or 12 years old with like a traveling child orchestra or whatever.
Cool.
Uh, and then eventually I didn't want to do that anymore because I thought guitar was cooler, which I don't know. Arguably, that's a suspect assumption I had, I think. But I was that was like what I was doing with most of my day. Like I would spend 2-3 hours a day just practicing, like pretty serious guitar type drills, and then trying to be in bands. I think I was playing in like a wedding band for money at some point later in high school. Um, so a lot of bands for fun. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, just because I think it's somewhat amusing, is that like at that time I was like average at best in math. Like that was not my strong suit at all. And it was another thing where I thought I think I just had like a bad experience one year. I don't know, maybe in like trig or something, where I was like, this isn't for me. I can't do this. I'm a writer. I'm better at I'm like crushing AP English and all this stuff. Like this is just where I should be. But then, I went to college, and I think one of the things you had to take was calculus, and it all just sort of clicked for me. I didn't understand like the applications when I was
Mm.
in high school. And then you do like a big part of calculus is like how that's useful in the world, and how it all fits together. And it was just like this mind-blowing kind of epiphany. And that was all I wanted to really study in college after that,
Cool.
which was a bit of a leap. But uh, I think I think honestly, like the type of math that is taught maybe in high school, middle school, just feels so different than the type of math at the collegiate, like the undergrad level and beyond, that there's another area where like what's the thing that could happen to like kind of bridge those gaps for people. And I really think like now, just kind of talking out loud, like co- coding could kind of be that bridge. Like you can teach people mathematical concepts, I think, through like really basic like computing programs, and maybe it's like some kind of combination of the two at a younger level that sort of can open up STEM. And the applications, like the applications is what's gonna um, what's gonna really resonate, I think, with a younger person.
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe I mean clearly like abstract algebra does resonate with some young
Yeah, no,
people,
you're
but it was
absolutely
not me.
right. It's answering that so what, why does this matter question, which like
Yeah,
making it relevant. Yeah, otherwise that mindset of that for that age group is, if it doesn't connect with me and I can't connect with it,
yeah,
unless you're just like my little brother who was just really nerdy into math to solve all the problems nobody else could.
yeah,
But a lot of people just don't have that drive or
yeah,
talent.
yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And it's yeah, but I think yeah, I'd love to see the field like dramatically expand. So there's less of like a stereotype of who should be doing it or be good at it.
Yes. Awesome.
So did you choose math as your major in high school, or did you choose your major when you were in high school?
So yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, what I really wanted to do is just go to music school, and then my parents were kind of like, "You're not good enough. You're not. It's not going to work out for you." Which I don't know, arguable, but I think they're right in terms of like having a stable adult life. Um, and so I went as a business major. I thought that would be like the practical thing to do. Like I grew up in like a very kind of more working class post-industrial type city. So that was just like kind of what people did. They like did business degrees and stuff like that. I think you're very influenced around like what you see
Mm.
um, when you're younger. And then as soon as I went from that to Boston University, and it's kind of like you very quickly realize that the the opportunities are much more expansive than that. So I think that's something that's really cool about just the college experience in general, that you can kind of figure it out while you're there.
Yeah. So you took the calculus, you just fall in love, and then just did math afterwards.
Yeah,
That's pretty
that's pretty
amazing.
much it.
Interesting how you went from like music to math and then to geoscience,
Yeah,
sorry, biology, and then like ads campaign. It's just all different jumps. That's very, all very different and interesting.
yeah. I think this is probably not the best, career approach in general. I was just kind of like bouncing between like what really interested me at that moment. Um, I'm not like that anymore. I'm much like, I think 5 years into the future now, and not just a couple months. Um, But I think there is something to say, like you can, if you're a little restless and you haven't figured it out, like that's totally fine. It's not gonna pass you by.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's good to have different life experiences. Being just data scientist forever doing one thing in your life is boring. It's nice to try different things.
Yeah, I do think that's true for sure. And now, well, the other thing now that I'm a bit more like settled down, so to speak, I'm I think I'm a way better student in terms of like continued education.
Mm.
And for instance, this this master's program I'm working on now, like I almost want to the like I think the main driver for doing that is like I just want like deeper understanding, Like, I want to be in this field for a long time, and like how do I get that this more like deep theoretical knowledge now that I've applied it for a little bit. And I don't know that I would have had the discipline to go so deep into it when I was younger, because it's so much like concentrated study on one particular thing. But it's like now that I've found that I really do love this area, it's a lot. It's easier to enjoy the study. I'd say it's not just
Mm.
like you're trying to do it to get a job anymore. It's like how do you kind of like holistically get better at this stuff?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And you know what you want to study more, and you can apply what you're studying to your work. Um, I think that really helps. Yeah. And for those of you who are confused, Mark is also doing an online master's degree in data science right now while working full time.
Oh yes, I should have specified that. Um, yeah, it's been cool to see these programs pop up. This particular one at UT Austin. This is actually, I believe, the first semester they're doing this master's in data science sub program. They've had a computer science program, as you know, and yeah, I think you'll start to see more of this, like the academy, so to speak, formalizing the idea of like what data science is, and having different master's degrees pop up, as opposed to maybe in the past it was more like masters in statistics if you want to do specifically data science stuff.
Right, right. Data science and statistics are actually relevant, but not exactly the same.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so it's good. A lot of schools are opening up data science program focusing on both statistics and computer science, which are needed for data science jobs. Okay, great. Let's going back to your current job. So in your current job, your current role, what kind of business problems are you solving, and what kind of data do you use?
Yeah, so I'd say two major areas. One is we have this, this online learning subscription product. People can watch videos of live trainings, they can read books, they can watch like lecture style videos. So what our team really focuses on is, all right, can we kind of analyze what people have done to try to predict whether they're happy with the service, or are they going to churn in the future, or if they're a kind of like a trialer, are they going to convert? So we try to slice up the the space of available actions, so to speak, into some numerical representation for each person, and then do some modeling to kind of answer those business questions. That's one big part of it. The other is that O'Reilly's sort of an aggregator in a Netflix type of way. It's another way you could look at it, in that there's like 70,000 pieces of content on there. Most of it, the vast majority, is not created by O'Reilly, the publisher, but via publishing partners. And then there's some license agreement, between O'Reilly and these partners. But the input content, like imagine the HTML readout of one of the textbooks that's on the site is all very unstructured and wildly different between hundreds or thousands of different publishers. So if we want to kind of answer questions like what subtopics are people reading, like that's really hard to know because the books themselves don't have a single topic, nothing's tagged correctly, everything's in a different format, and it, you know, reasonable people on the business side want to know these questions, and it's really hard to give an answer. So I think a lot of the work is trying to answer like what should be basic questions and figuring out the maybe like infrastructure gaps about how we answer those questions.
Yeah, those are hard questions to answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes business will just give us questions we can't really answer from the data.
Yeah, and it's like how do you kind of just explain why that is and why it's a difficult problem? Because you don't want to sound like you're being difficult or can't do it or don't want to do it, you know? It's just
Right.
like this is hard because of XYZ. So that's where kind of that communication aspect comes in, which is really a big part of the data science role in general. Like how do you kind of get people excited about the difficult infrastructure problems you have to solve to answer basic questions, and like why should they care about that, and help you out, and try to get, you know, more data eng hires to support you, to data eng hires to support you and stuff like that. It
Right,
becomes a
right.
bit of a selling game.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Sometimes they don't know how hard it is to solve a simple question and how much
Yes,
support you need.
yes, absolutely.
If you're comfortable sharing about just like the diversity of the workplace, you know, if you feel like it's well represented, and just maybe in your current or past jobs or total, like a cumulative, so what's your view into the world?
Yeah, so I had I read this, I'd seen this question kind of before, and I was my general opinion is it's very bad in the diversity landscape, and it's something the field needs to work on like with great haste, starting 5 years ago. And I was
Mhm.
wondering like, okay, like how bad is it really? Can I get some data on that? And
Mm.
I found some companies that do like big surveys in the data science world. This Birch Works seems to survey like a couple thousand data scientists in the US, I think, every year, and just show the trends, both primarily in the like male female split. And while it's going in the right direction, it's actually worse than I thought it was gonna be, at least based on this survey, which I think they tried to make quite accurate. So in terms of who they're sampling, so it said in 2018, 15% of data scientists were female. In 2020, that's increased, but only to 18%. And
Wow.
those are just shocking numbers to me. It hasn't been the like that on the teams I have worked on. Um, Particularly Facebook, like company-wide, gender-wide, is pretty well balanced. But clearly, that's just not the case in the if you look in the broader industry. And I think this survey tries to look at both large and small companies, and not just like the big tech companies. Um,
Wow.
so how do you start fixing that? One encouraging sign in this latest survey they had done was it seemed like at the more entry level, the proportion of females was increasing at a faster rate. So that's good because it means that maybe this work getting broad equitable gender representation at a younger age is paying off and starting to move the needle, but certainly not fast enough. And then if you start talking beyond gender, and into both socioeconomic background and racial background, I think it's the picture's probably worse. honestly, although I couldn't find like a survey like that for data science, which probably isn't a good sign. So yeah, this is something that bothers me quite a bit. A white male in the in the field, but I hope that I can get to a point where I'm more at like a much higher level in some organization that has a, you know, a large data team and can start, just dictating what I want to see company wide. Because I really do think unless that you need an alignment from executive teams and HR that are sort of controlling the pipeline of candidates that you're seeing. And an example I'll give with this is anytime I've been on the interviewing end, I've never had the opportunity to like screen the resumes or go search for candidates. Never. It's always like, okay, this is what's available that we're of people that we're going to be interviewing that pass the HR round. So there's no purview into that, and it's not just like me. That's just how these companies are set up. I don't want to like kind of throw HR under the bus, but there's something happening in terms of like the screening process or what the type of universities that people are trying to pull from that also kind of reflect these demographics. Like, yeah, if you know what, if you only hire from 20 schools in CS degrees, your pool that goes HR is just gonna kind of look like that. So how do you kind of break out of that? And yeah, I think it's something the whole field needs to really get together and work on.
Interesting. Thanks for digging into that.
Yeah, no problem.
If you're up for sharing, just you don't have to share your salary, just whatever you feel comfortable sharing about what people should be looking for or expecting in a
Yeah,
position like
so
that.
I got some data on this as well, which I think is actually probably broader and hopefully more accurate. So I learned that 40% of all data scientists are on the West Coast. Didn't know that. That I mean, it's not that surprising because like I think most of them that are most people called data scientists, it's heavily skewed from like Facebook and Google hiring tons of them. They happen to be on the West Coast. There's a big bias in that regard, but that notwithstanding, yeah. So there's when you come in at a data scientist to one of these companies, a lot of the individual contributor bands are like in IC1 to let's say IC7, and then you have like that interval, and then eventually like people become managers, and it's like a different path, right? But data science roles in general, usually the lowest you're going to see, I think, is like IC3, because a lot of times data scientists are coming in with an advanced degree anyway, in over 90% of cases apparently. So if you're looking at like IC3, IC4, IC5, which will be anywhere from like data scientist job title to senior data scientist at the IC5 level. I think base wise, this obviously you got to adjust for geographic region, but I think you could comfortably say the range is going to be like 95K to 160K base with outliers on either side. I think it particularly on like the higher IC ranges at the big tech companies on the West Coast, it'll be a bit higher than that. Where it gets more variable is there's typically two other components to the comp as well. One being like an equity component, which could be stock options if it's a private company, which is something that could have value in the future. Or it could be those are usually called ISOs, I think. Or it could be RSUs at like some of these big tech companies, which, you have a grant over 4 years from when you start. and you get some amount of stock compensation every quarter that you can keep or treat it as like sort of a cash bonus. And then there's typically some cash bonus component as well. So it's, if you start thinking about those three things, it can be quite appealing to be in this profession, especially at the higher levels. But that's where it does get kind of extremely competitive, I think. Once you get into like the more senior data scientist territory. But that I think those base numbers is probably a pretty good range to look at. And then in terms of like a cash bonus, you could expect anything from 5 to 15% a year. In terms of what that equity piece looks like, that could be anywhere from 0 to I don't know. It varies too much to even throw out an estimate, but you will see that especially more at like the big tech type firms. And a resource that I think is useful that you can scrape is levels.fyi is very useful. There's I think a couple in the hundreds of data scientist salaries with detail about like where they're located, years of experience, all this stuff at different companies, different bands that I think can give a pretty good sense.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for all your advices and all your stories. Are there any other advice you want to share with the students who want to become data scientists?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll try to be more concise on this particular point. So I think, there's not one single right path. Absolutely. I mean, they let me do it and I was all over the place. So I think there's really no single right path. If it's definitely more common if you're studying something in the hard sciences, social sciences, math, computer science, engineering. That's like your undergrad degree, and you immediately get a master's or something. It's probably going to be a bit more straightforward and easier for you to jump into data science directly. You'll probably get recruited at some point in your academic program. I think there's a lot of other ways and other jobs that you could look at and then transition to data science later. You know, web, you could do QA testing, like market research, ad campaign optimization, all these different like kind of, or business analytics. All these different things can give that like good analytical foundation in real world settings. And you could certainly like transition after a year or two. I think one thing that would have, I mean, for a while was something I worked very, very, very like too hard on, was probably just like the programming ability. You do need to have that to do well in the field in 2021. And it's not, yes, it's an important part of the interview process, like just programming ability. You're going to be tested on it. And you're going to be tested on it against people that have probably been doing it for longer, but you need it on the job too. Like it's a very important part of the job. I think over time, it's only going to increase where data scientists are sort of becoming more like software engineers. Like I've definitely seen the expectations for my own kind of code that I've had to write over time, even in a couple years, like really increase to more stuff that I would have thought is more like software engineering, but is, it's just part of it. And other people I talk to that are data scientists too, that's true as well. And I do now firmly believe though that's something you can work on to get better at, which would bring me to my final point is just like, I think the wrong way to approach it would be like, I want to learn Python. Like that's not going to do it. Like you need to be like, I want to build something so that I don't have to do spreadsheet work anymore because I hate Excel and I never want to use Excel again. And like, how do I not do that? And there's good answers to that. There's stuff you can, pick up so that you never have to use Excel again. I haven't opened Excel in like 7 years, and I hope to not have to do so. But yeah, I think having a tangible project in mind, and it could be literally anything. Like if you're into music, I don't know, you could do like take your music library and try to predict the genre of the tracks you have, like a basic machine learning project. So you could go on Kaggle and you can see, Kaggle's like a data science competition website for those that don't know, and see like if there people have done similar things, and you just kind of see how they did it, and you're like, okay, how could I kind of try to build something similar? But yeah, I think having a firm task in mind that you could solve with a like a programming language, and that's more in the data realm, just doing a couple of those, studying how people do it online, reading blogs, going on YouTube, a lot of YouTube, will be like a really, really great entry point. And then you'll figure out like what you like doing as you do that. And then you can go deeper, and you don't have to like be, it's not about like having a perfect solution or like having amazing code when you start. It's just like, what can I solve? And then you get more confidence as you see that you sort of solved that thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you so much. That's such a good advice. I like project-driven learning instead of just learning by reading a book or, you know, doing things without a purpose. Doing a project really helps.
Yeah, it's, as much as I do love reading books, I learned that like that just wasn't going to work for the tech stuff. Because that's how
Yeah,
I initially tried. I was like, well, I'll just like read these textbooks. And that, no, it just like was sort of a wasted time. As soon as I started doing more project driven, then it you learn quicker, I think.
yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you so much for talking with us today. We really appreciate your time and your advice. Thank you.